Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration.
If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you. We have a really special guest coming up today, but we thought before we get right into our episode with Dr. Karl Lehman, we'd do a little bit of an intro to kind of orient people so that they can understand where we go and what's happening in this episode. So Dr. Karl Lehman is gonna talk about Emmanuel healing. It's a kind of a process or a form of healing, a way of healing that he started and initiated with the support of friends and other people like Jim Wilder and folks like that. Here's one of the things I love about it. This is why I'm really excited to have him on, is he honors, I think, maybe the two most basic realities in existence. And when you get these two realities to cooperate, wonderful things happen. And what those realities are is the natural and the supernatural. Dr. Karl does a great job of honoring the natural in the sense of neurology, emotional processing, those kinds of things, and complements that with how God interacts with the natural. And so it's normal. For example, the effect of gratitude on the brain and how it facilitates healing. Like that's just one tiny little thing that we'll touch on in the episode. So listeners, Dr. Karl's a Christian, doesn't come from a Catholic background. He's very Catholic friendly. The material, I don't find anything in it that's contrary to the faith. It's pretty benign, I think, in that regard. But Bob, what's initial thoughts for you?
Yeah, it's great to have him on. We're grateful that he's come. When we do our training, one of the things that we include is this Immanuel approach to prayer in our prayer ministry training. And it's very similar to a spiritual direction approach where you reconnect to the grace that you've received.
Yes.
And it's also what I think communion is about, the Eucharist is about, which is this encounter with God's presence, with Jesus' presence. And this is just entering into it in a prayer experience that could be, as we'll talk about it, could be in communion, but it could be at any time in our life. And it's just allowing God to be God, as we talked about in the last episode. It's letting go of our control and allowing Jesus to be the one who leads us in the healing process.
Yeah. As I mentioned when we recorded it, I've been following Dr. Karl's work for a long time. I know you have too. But, he was one of the cutting edge guys that was really integrating the truths of psychology with Christianity and inner healing prayer, and just the resources that this guy offers. It's amazing. So I really want to encourage you listeners to go check out his websites and his books. Like he offers a lot for free, which is really generous. So you'll hear about all the websites.
Yeah. And whatever stereotypes you might have about psychiatrists, he doesn't fit the mold of those stereotypes. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of really good psychiatrists, but he's not somebody who stands there and analyzes. He's one who shares intimately his own struggle, his own journey. He's a very sensitive heart. And
that's what I was going to say is you hear throughout the episode his tenderness of heart.
Yeah.
He loves people and he loves Jesus meeting people.
Yeah.
And that just comes out through and through with the episode. And he's excited, isn't he?
Yeah,
You can see in the episode, he is excited about what God is doing with his people. So anyway, anything else, Bob, before we let people listen in?
No, we just wanted to do this little intro because once we started, Jake and I didn't say a whole lot.
No, we didn't. It was just going. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it might feel like, listeners, you're picking up right in the middle of a conversation, but we were literally in the middle of the conversation. I was like, oh, I need to hit record. There's too many good things. Like we hadn't even officially started.
Yeah.
So anyway, listeners, we hope this blesses you and enjoy.
Actually, this is a fun story that you might want to use it.
Yeah.
So, people often ask, so does this work for non-believers? I mean, it's clearly so Christian, explicitly Christ-centered.
Right.
So understandably, people ask, well, yeah, so this is all good, but there's a whole lot of the world that aren't believers, and what about that? And what I found is the only criteria is if they're willing to try it.
Wow.
And I've had a number of people, well, in my office, they're just in a lot of, if someone's in my office, they're in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And so mostly now, well, actually 100%, there's people anybody who gets a spot in my office, they're asking for the Immanuel Approach. I mean, they've been in line for 5 years to get to try the Immanuel Approach. So if anybody calls who isn't wanting the Immanuel Approach, I'm like, there's 300 psychiatrists in Chicago.
Have your pick. Yeah.
Please find one, because there's a lot of folks who are begging for Immanuel Approach, and it just seems like good stewardship. But about 10, 15 years ago, at the front end of the things, I still had, I'd get occasional non-believer of referral, especially for somebody I knew, and if they were like a child or somehow connected to somebody I knew.
Yeah.
And so I'd get somebody in front of me who's a non-believer, and I would just explain, okay, the tool I use that's on average generally the most effective, and it even works for people who don't share my faith. It's a faith-based tool, but it's generally very effective. And when it does work, it's the most effective, gentlest tool I'm aware of. And the people who've been in my office, it's only been a handful, but every single one of them, they're like, well, and I just described it here. So here's exactly what we would do. And you can see that's faith-based. When it does work, it's particularly gentle. It's very effective. Would you be willing to just try it? And they all basically say, hey, the people I trust told me to come see you. I'm desperate. Nothing else has worked. If this doesn't work, I'm going to shoot myself in the head, and they're not joking.
Yeah.
And one guy, I'll talk to the Pillsbury Doughboy if you think that'll help. And I'll do anything. The people I trust you. I'll do anything. Sure. And so I say, we'll go to a positive memory. And I even say, and with the prayer piece, I realize you don't share my belief. You don't believe that, but it's okay to pray like this. So Jesus, I don't even believe you exist, but if you do exist and you're not an asshole, because a lot of people have had pretty negative experiences with the church.
Yeah.
If you do exist and you're not a horrible, toxic jerk, then please help me to perceive your presence in this positive memory. And he shows up. And this, oh my gosh. So when he was 20, 23, 25 years old, first time he was like, okay, I'll try it. We did the prayer, and he's like, oh, Dr. Layman, Jesus is in my memory. And I'm like, I didn't think you believed. I was in a mischievous mood. I don't know. Hey, I thought you didn't believe in Jesus. He's like, he's standing right in front of me. He's in my memory, standing right in front of me. I'm like, so how do you know it's Jesus? You didn't even believe in him a minute ago. I mean, how do you even know it's Jesus? You never met him before. He goes, dude, when the Son of God is standing in front of you, you know who he is. So I said, okay.
That is
so we
awesome.
We just did it. And it was like, okay. I mean, he was there because he was miserable. And it's okay, Jesus, this guy's miserably depressed. He wants to commit suicide. He's got panic disorder, whatever. I can't remember all the details, but he was miserable.
Yeah.
The Lord took him to the root memories. He got all this healing. I mean, every session he felt better. I mean, he felt like he had discovered the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And 4 or 5 sessions, and he only had a handful of sessions, and he was doing so well. He went on with his life. Wow. But 4 or 5 sessions in, I mean, most of his depression and anxiety were gone. And we got to the end of the session, and he just looks at me with this just totally just guileless sort of wonder on his face. He says, is this what you Christians do?
Oh, wow. It's so precious.
And I said, well, there's more. I mean, there's more to it than just this. I mean, there is more to Christianity than just what we're doing. But this is supposed to be the most important part. He goes, well, so if I be a Christian, can I keep doing this? I said, yeah. So what do I have to do to be a Christian? Like, can you let me be a Christian?
Wow.
Can you let me be a Christian? What do I have to do to be a Christian? Can you help me be a Christian? I want to be a Christian so I can keep doing this.
It's so beautiful.
Oh my gosh. So that's why I have passion. There's not a single person on the planet whose life would not change for the better if they learned how to have an interactive, tangible relationship with the living friendship, personal presence of Jesus.
Amen.
Anyway, so
Amen. Well,
I'll try to follow your guys' lead from, but that's
this is awesome.
That's beautiful.
Listeners, Bob and I are here, and we want to welcome Dr. Karl Lehman to the podcast. He's I was sharing with you, Karl, before we turned on the mics, just I've been following your work for over 20 years and have been a student of yours through your websites and books and things for a long time, and have been greatly blessed. And many people have been blessed because of what you and Jim Wilder discovered, I guess, or the Lord showed you. But just for people to have a context. So your bio. So Dr. Layman is a board certified psychiatrist with 25 years.
35 now, actually. I should have updated it. Sorry.
No, it's a problem. 35 years. So we'll just add another decade on there. 35 years and more. So it says 40,000 hours. We're probably upwards of 50.
That's accurate. I just
Okay, 40
years.
No problem. So 40,000 hours of clinical experience. He's worked tenaciously throughout his career to integrate his personal Christian faith with medical science, modern mental health care, and rigorous scientific training. He has especially worked to integrate faith-based emotional healing with the insights provided by psychological and neurological research. That, to me, is one of the most brilliant parts of what you've done. In addition to observations from his clinical work and extensive ongoing study of a wide range of research literature, Dr. Layman is also deeply committed to his own growth and healing, constantly learning through the application of emotional healing principles and tools in his personal journey. He's been married for 25 years, and he and his wife, Charlotte, work as a team to apply everything they've learned about growth and healing in the context of their marriage. So, Karl, we are just delighted to have you on. You, to me, are one of the pioneers and one of the pillars in the emotional healing community and Christian community. I'm just so grateful for you and what all you've done. And I said to you earlier, so listeners, you probably heard Bob and I talk about Dr. Layman before, but if you go to his website, one of three of his websites, the one that I was first encountered was KC Layman, LEHMAN.com. You can basically get a graduate degree in Christian emotional healing for free. Just read everything on the website. And it's amazing. So there's things in there comparing EMDR to Theophostic to Emmanuel healing. There's things in there about the entire Emmanuel healing approach. It's just so, Karl, thanks for being on. We're really grateful to have you here and bless our listeners. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm grateful for the privilege. Actually, I'm grateful for you all helping me reach more people with just really good news about how the living presence of Jesus can be in the middle of their lives, their mental health, healing. And God designed the brain. And the more we know about how to cooperate with it, the more effectively things work. And to be able to bring principles where we apply brain science to help people connect with Jesus and then get him more effectively, more able to actually get their brain in the right place so they can more easily, more consistently, more clearly perceive his tangible, interactive living presence. I want as many people as possible to find that good news, and thank you for helping me do that.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Karl, my family and I, and then our community, we had a Tallahassee healing community here. All were watching Restarting for years. So we got introduced for many years as a whole community, and as a family, we went through that together. And one of the things that I really appreciate in your sharing of your articles is your personal application, your vulnerability in all of your writing. I mean, it just is a great model for psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists of every kind, and for church, anybody in the church. And because of that, it's so easily relatable. I mean, we feel like we know you already because of how much time we've spent reading your articles and hearing your stories. And so we really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, you are so welcome. The fun thing there is when you get the triggers out, like if you have a painful experience and you really get it fully healed, and one way you can tell you really got it fully healed is you can talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, people, oh, thank you for being so vulnerable. It cost me nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, when there's no pain left,
No
when there's no
shame.
shame left, when it's completely clean, all it is a testimony.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
it's, the memories are clean. Like I said, there's no pain, there's no shame. And talking about how Jesus, I processed that experience with Jesus, and now it's different. And this is the way it used to be. And this is what it looked like to interact with Jesus in that memory. And now all these positive, absorbable changes that everybody else in my life can see, and they last and they accumulate. Like, just sharing that costs nothing. So to me, vulnerability just gets amazingly easy as you keep getting your own healing.
Yeah.
Amen. I would love to hear, Karl, if you could talk to us about the genesis of the Immanuel Approach, because it sounds like, if I understand your story correctly, you were a Christian or been a Christian your whole life, and then you go to medical school, you become a practicing psychiatrist, and then you start bumping into traditional methodologies, prescription meds, all those kinds of things. And I don't know if I could pinpoint when you went, hold on a second, this Jesus guy is pretty effective. Like, what can you tell us about that?
So I'll see if I can, so many fun things to share. I'll see if I can give you a short summary.
Okay.
Part of the story is, as a child, my father was a pastoral counselor, one of the leaders of our church, LCSW. So as a kid, I saw him integrating faith and prayer and healing prayer into mental health care. So I was aware of that model, that idea. As a teenager, I was reading Francis McNutt. I don't know if you're familiar with Francis McNutt. In fact, what's fun is when I was a just wet behind the ears medical student resident, just getting through with my training, I looked up to Francis as the hero. He was one of my mentors and a hero to me, and I read all of his books. And if I ever got to spend 3 minutes with him after a seminar or something, it was like made my whole year.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is he then is like my age now.
Oh.
And that was when he was essentially where I'm at now, and it's still weird to me to realize now I've been doing this for 40 years, and the 25 and 30-year-olds see me the way I saw Francis McNutt, which is that just kind of just to me still feels like when I think of Francis, I still feel like a little kid.
Yeah.
So
that's so cool.
So that seeing my dad do that, reading. Like I said, in high school, college, and medical school, I was reading Agnes Sanford, Francis McNutt, those books.
Yeah.
So I was aware of that whole model.
Yep.
And then when I decided I wanted to go into medical school, first, actually, I was just thinking general practice. Because I started in sciences. I was originally going to be, as a child, my thought of how I could best help save the world was get a PhD in physics and be a part of the team developing nuclear fusion, because clean energy, unlimited clean energy, would make a big dent in just all kinds of problems: economics, environmental destruction, pollution, whatever.
Yeah.
So like at 4, when I would read the newspapers about all the environmental destruction and feel that felt frightening and hopeless and overwhelming, I thought, if I can get a PhD in physics and help develop nuclear fusion, then the whole world will be a better place for people like me, and I wouldn't have to be scared all the time. I didn't articulate it quite that clearly as a 4-year-old, but that was my career plan.
Sure.
Which didn't change until the second semester of my senior year in college, where I was finishing my bachelor's degrees in physics and chemistry and biology and a minor in math. And I realized I love learning about science, but a career in research science is not the same as reading textbooks. So, that's how that works. Oh, I always wanted to know how that worked. And I'm like, some of that hadn't really sunk in until I was, thinking about which graduate school I might go to. And the other piece is, I worked hard. I studied hard. In my school, I could always be towards the top of my class if I worked hard enough. But when you go into career research, like the guys who are working on nuclear fusion and things that change the world, so the average IQ of a career theoretical physicist is 162.
Ouch.
Genius cutoff is 142.
Whoa.
So the average theoretical physicist is 20 points above genius.
Okay. I won't ask you what your IQ is, but there's something.
Never gotten it tested. It's above average, but it's not 162. And part of how I know that is, so in my high school, big high school, accelerated programs, advanced placement, calculus, physics, chemistry, I sat next to a guy who could be a theoretical physicist. This is the smartest person I've ever known in my life. But being in a big school in the accelerated, the top little accelerated program in the whole school, where my senior year, you're taking all college courses. And Dana came out of the SATs. And the rest of us, we were, in that class, 2/3 of our class in that classroom of chemistry and physics were National Merit Scholars. 65% of the students in that classroom were National Merit Scholars. And Dana made all of us look slow. And we came out of the SATs, and me and my buddy, we were all, all of us who got National Merit Scholars, we were like, that was really hard. And Dana walks out and he goes, damn, blankety blank. He swears, like, I missed one. So stupid. Number 47. I can't believe it.
Wow.
And he was right. He missed one. He knew which one it was, why he missed it as he walked out the door, and he thought that was stupid.
Oh my word.
So part
Good
of the
model.
journey there was I realized, you know what? Those are the guys who, I mean, God bless them. It really would be good to develop better energy technology for just caring for the planet. But that's not me. I mean, you really want to, ideally, you want to go into a career where you really have gifting and you can combine hard work with gifting. But it's like this comes naturally to me, and I'm disciplined and work hard, and it pays the bills. And I realized I have more natural gifting working with people. I mean, I love the sciences. I had piles and piles of science. Like I said, I mean, I had a bachelor's degree in chemistry and in physics and in biology and a minor in math. But I just sort of, as I was kind of struggling with that, I realized, you know, long story short, medicine with more people, a lot of the science, but more people actually would be a better fit for not just interest, but also my gifting. And you don't want to spend your whole career being the slowest kid on the whole team. Where my buddies, I mean, and there's stuff like with this kid, I mean, he would miss a whole week of lectures. Where I was there every day, I'd read the whole chapter, do every practice problem. He would walk into he forgot the test was today. And he sits right next to me, right, for the whole program. He's the seat next to me. He just stares at his test. He goes, oh, he derives the equations himself. Like the equations that we learned from the teacher in the book, you know, for the whole week.
Goodness.
He sits down, forgot there was a test. Oh, the light bulb goes on. He derives all the equations for that unit himself originally during the test.
Oh my.
Then does the whole test in the next 15 minutes and then walks out early. I take every minute of the test, barely finished, and we got the same score. So that's again, like, so I thought, you know, this guy blessed you to be a theoretical physicist. Hopefully you'll figure out nuclear fusion. But I realized that's just not my gifting. So I decided to go into medicine. Just by accident, I had all my pre-med requirements. You know, I mean, with a major in physics and a major in biology and a major in chemistry. And by accident, I had like 2 classes I had to add in there. Went to medical school, and then realized that psychiatry was even more my passion. And in all that journey, I was integrating faith. I mean, I was a believer, you know, like I said, reading Friends of Big Nut, integrating my science and faith. And so from the first day of medical school, I'm thinking, how do I integrate prayer and healing prayer into medicine? So from the first day during residency, when I'm starting to see patients in my own private practice, from the first day, I'm adding prayer along with, you know, I had insight-oriented psychotherapy, cognitive therapy, medication, and prayer. And it, you know, it was good for coping. I mean, the meds and the cognitive therapy were good for managing and coping. And with the prayer and the therapy as the tools I had back then, once in a while, we really would get miraculous healing. I mean, once in a while, the person would have an encounter with Jesus and have really a life-changing, something would really move. I mean, a lifetime problem with overeating or addiction, whatever, would go away and not come back. And I was like, wow. But that was like the really painful truth is that was like 5%. And it was 95% of my practice was people who I cared about who were in pain all the time. And I could help them cope and manage. And 1 out of 20 would get something really dramatic, beautiful. But those are glorious. But 95% people you care about and they're suffering, and that's just hard.
Yeah.
EMDR was a notch up. That was more effective. 20-25%. Added theophostic to that. You know, prayer, EMDR, theophostic prayer. And that was, you know, 50%, 70 or something, which is way, way better than 5. But even with that, so that might have been 5, 6, 8 years into my career there. Compared to where I started, fantastic results with theophostic prayer, theophostic EMDR.
Yes.
But there were still people that every single week I had people in my office still that were in pain. I cared about them. They were in excruciating pain. And the tools I had, we couldn't get unstuck. I mean, I had somebody every single week for a year we spent a whole session troubleshooting. I mean, every tool I'd ever heard, learned about, read in the books. I mean, tried 5 ways, each one 5 times, backwards, forwards, upwards, and downwards.
Yeah.
And I just, at a point of desperation, I was like, Lord, I know you can heal. And it just felt true. I know you can heal this person. I know you want to heal this person. I know you're here in the room with us. I cannot figure out what to do. I don't know what else to do. What are we missing, Lord? And one of the clearest times I've ever experienced in my life, immediately a clear thought came to like rearrange the priority from just like, it's all about getting into the trauma, which that's an important thing to do. It was like, no, first priority is to use all the tools you have and everything you've learned to help them connect with Jesus. But that was the first person like me. I mean, I'm kind of sensing this. He's like, help them actually get a living connection with me. And then, I mean, that should be number one, center, foundation, beginning of everything you do. Yeah. And then in that context, you work on trauma. And that was kind of the geminal, so I was already including prayer, and I'd seen Jesus living. And part of why I was so open to the whole idea is I'd seen people interact with Jesus in trauma. And when it happened, it was spectacular. And it was like nothing else. I mean, everything else just faded. The healing power and effectiveness of the living presence of Jesus. When people would actually experience this living, tangible, interactive presence in a trauma, it's like nothing else even came close. With EMDR, all the other tools I had, any case studies I've ever read. I mean, there's brain processes God designed that actually are built to actually process trauma and heal it. And like the EMDR, the secular EMDR folks, God's grace to non-believers.
Yeah.
But when people would start perceiving and interacting with the living presence of Jesus, just the whole game just changes. I mean, it's just like, oh, we're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And the idea of deliberately doing that, as opposed to like I'm using other tools and it would happen kind of unpredictably. It was whenever it happened, we were thrilled. And like in Theophostic and other ministries, none of them are opposed to the living presence of Jesus. And they're thrilled when it happens, but it's not a standard routine, like every session, this is a foundation, and we have systematic brain science tools to deliberately help it to happen regularly and predictably.
Yes.
That idea was the new, like that is the foundation and beginning and center of everything we do. And everything else comes next.
Yeah.
Yes.
How long did it take your practice to change from that point forward, and how did it change?
Oh, so at that point, Jim Wilder and I, you mentioned getting started, so you're familiar with Jim Wilder.
Yeah, the life model has been a big part of both of our formation. Yeah.
Oh, yes, the whole maturity skills and capacity stuff. There's pieces there we learned from him that were like a piece of the pie. There's another one of those places in life where it's like, well, some stuff is working, triggering and trauma, and this gets better, but there's parts that still aren't working, and you realize, oh, maturity skills. You have to learn maturity skills. If your fingers are broken and you heal them, you don't just know how to play the piano just by having, your hands, you can learn to play the piano if you want to, now that your hands aren't broken. Yes. But just healing your hands doesn't teach you how to play the piano. There's a learning skill piece. That whole idea of there are maturity relational skills you have to learn and practice. That was like one of those life-changing light bulbs. Oh my goodness. Like there was a whole organ system I was missing.
Yeah.
No wonder some of my patients were baffling. I didn't know about the kidneys. Why didn't somebody tell me about the kidneys?
Right.
So that was his life model, maturity skill stuff, fantastic. And he and I, at that point, every Friday we would talk on the phone for an hour and a half, 2 hours. We were brainstorming together the pain processing pathway life model. There was about 2 years where every Friday we brainstormed together on the phone for an hour or two.
You guys started podcasting. You just didn't record it.
Well,
yeah. Is that basically what?
Yes, that actually, that would be fun if we had
oh man, that would have
recorded
been
that would
no
have been
kidding.
fantastic.
Anyway, sorry to distract.
So within a week or two of having this session where I just felt the Lord telling me, hey, the germinal, the beginning seed of the whole Immanuel Approach process, that insight. So within a week or two, the next time I had talked to Jim on the phone, I kind of shared, I just described the whole thing. He was like, the light bulb went on for him right away too. It was like, oh my goodness, that's big. And then the two of us were like, okay, so relational circuits, that would probably all work best if we had people's relational circuits on deliberately. Oh yeah, and the way things are wired, as far as we can tell, if you feel appreciation, it turns your relational circuits on. Yeah, right. And so and the way we're wired, a very simple, predictable way to get people to feel appreciation, to get their relational circuits on, if they pick an actual positive memory from their own experience. That's a very simple, practical way. A 23-year-old volunteer in Uganda with a third grade education can help somebody remember, like, okay, pick a really positive memory. Okay, let's think, times you were in Christmas, favorite guest, your best friend when you were in second grade. Did you have a pet you really liked? You can teach a 23-year-old volunteer with a third grade education to help somebody find a positive memory and coach them. Okay, now close your eyes, picture yourself in the positive memory, and then think about and describe the details in as much detail as possible for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And you do that, and they'll be connected to the positive memory, feeling appreciation, and their relational circuits will be online and active, and their brain will be prepared to connect with God.
Yeah.
And we put the brain science together. We're like, well, if we're right about that, we could do that at the beginning of a session, and that would increase people's ability. We've never seen that done. I mean, I was trauma. I mean, I know, okay, you go into the trauma, and once you're in the middle of the trauma and you have all the pieces together and you focus the line, and you have it all teed up. So, okay, now Jesus, could you please come for a brief consultation and speak truth? The idea, like, what if at the very beginning we go to a positive memory, stir up appreciation, get the person's relational circuits on, and help them connect with Jesus at the front end? We didn't even know if that was possible. I mean, like, is that even allowed? I mean,
right.
It never occurred to either of us.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's try it. And then he'd go back to his people. I mean, he did his Bible studies or whatever, and I'd go back to my practice. And the next week we'd be like, oh, you can't believe what happened. So we were like, oh, that's really exciting. And then we had another one, relationships are memory mapped. The reason you have a relationship with each other is you've spent time together. You've had adventures together. And if you lost all those memories, I think there's a merciful spirit piece. So that even people with Alzheimer's disease, they still have, there's a relationship still down there, but there's a very real way in which relationships are memory mapped. And you can feel that if you have a friend or a family member with Alzheimer's disease, and as they lose all the memories, they can't remember meeting you, they can't remember the camping trips, they can't remember being in Boy Scouts together again. And as they lose the memories of all your experiences together, you can feel the fabric of the relationship kind of disintegrating.
Yeah.
And likewise, if the average person doesn't have to be a brain scientist, like, okay, just think about, I can remember meeting my wife. I have thousands and thousands of memories with my wife. And there's a very real way in which my relationship with her is carried in all those memories. That's kind of a big part of our relationship is we have all these thousands of experiences that we shared, and we remember them together. And so we thought, so for people who have positive memories that included God, their relationship with God is actually carried in those memories. If they picked a positive memory that was one of those relationship memories, you kind of get a 2-for-1. They go inside the positive memory, they feel appreciation, they turn their relational circuits on, and they're warming up the circuits, their neurological circuits that carry their God memories, that carry their relationship with God. Those are all getting warmed up. Yeah. And it's like, that's a perfect platform. Like, if I want you to some best friend you haven't seen for 20 years, I say, okay, tell me about that best friend. Close your eyes, picture some of the favorite things you did together. Tell me about Boy Scout camp with Ben. And if you spent 15 minutes remembering your favorite memories together with Ben and connecting with them, picturing them, remembering them, and telling me about them, and then Ben walked in the door. Okay, your brain would be perfectly prepared to just step from a memory to a relationship in the present. Yeah. I think the average person intuitively oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Again, Jim and I, a lot of these, we did the brain science first, and we thought, okay, well, if that's right, then let's try it. And we would be like, oh my goodness, that worked. Yeah. Yeah. And then the next piece, the foundational piece, was our brains have been designed to work best in community. And there's actually 3 or 4 different ways that's true. Make a sermon series, like the 4 ways that our brains are designed to work best in the community, and how that's just interesting that our brains have been so profoundly designed to work best in community. which is right. That's a sermon series. That's a whole book. You can talk about that for hours just right there, and what that means and how that fits in with the whole Bible is about relationship with God. And well, one of those is that there's stuff that comes into your awareness that'll be faint, and you won't recognize you won't recognize what it means or feel its importance until you get words for it and share it with another person.
Mm.
And you watch this, and there in the Big Lion book, there's a whole chapter all about this piece about describe whatever comes into your awareness, regardless of whether it makes sense or feels important or is neatly packaged. And that's a skill. That's anybody I teach the Immanuel Approach. That's one of the skills you learn. And as a facilitator, you coach the person. Well, just describe whatever's coming to you. Nothing's happening. It's not working. Okay, well, fine. Just humor me. Describe whatever's coming to your awareness, whether or not it makes sense or feels important or feels neatly packaged yet. Just whatever's in there, just try to describe it. Well, getting language for what's in there and then sharing it with another person pulls the content through the front of your brain on the right and the left, because that's what gets words, and that's what interacts with the person. Well, those two parts of your brain just happen to be also in the middle of recognizing what something means and feeling whether or not it's important. And if you observe an Immanuel Approach carefully, or actually any other therapy, this process works anywhere. This process works in your marriage if you're trying to discern where should we go on vacation, or how do we invest our resources, or how do we discipline our child, or what should we, whatever. Any question you're struggling with, if you learn the skill of noticing subtle things in your awareness and then sharing them with your partner, your prayer partner, your work team, or whatever, that process pulls them to the part of your brain that drastically increases your ability to recognize, oh, wait a minute, that little fragment of a thought, that's way more important than I realized. That's actually an important clue. Oh, and I can feel that it's important, and I can see where it fits in. And the point there is, many people have way more subtle connection with God than they realize. They just miss it.
Wow.
The Holy Spirit, the Lord's presence is more, and the Lord is more present to you. The Holy Spirit is more speaking to you. There's actually, I'm convinced it's true for everybody, because I've observed this now. For 20,000 hours of pre-Emmanuel and 20,000 hours with the full Emmanuel Approach, so 40,000 hours of doing therapy and some form of a lot of this, and observing deliberately, I've just seen thousands of cases where a person says, like, nothing's coming to me, nothing's happening. I say, okay, well, just let me tease it. There's a whole chapter about different specific ways to tease out, what practical things you can do to help a person learn the skill of being able to notice subtle stuff and describe it. And thousands of times I've seen somebody who says, nothing's happening, it's not working. Okay, and I coach them, well, just try this. And as they well, this little thought's coming to me, but it's not important. Well, just humor me. Just describe it to me. And as they're describing it, I can watch their face. The 30 seconds during the time they're getting the words and describing it to me, all of a sudden you see their eyes go, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, I'm in the car. Yeah. We're going to Uncle Bob's. That's the trip.
Yeah.
And before they did that, it was sitting right there, and they couldn't see it. There was an important clue sitting right in front of them, and they couldn't see what it meant or feel that it was important. Same thing happens with God's presence and content, the interactive presence of Jesus. So not only just perceiving his presence at all, but also when you ask, what about this, Lord? What about that? Can you look at this question with me? Thoughts come, and they just float through. The person doesn't feel their importance or recognize their meaning. If you include the piece and you learn the skill together of noticing subtle stuff and describing it, lots of subtle manifestations. Frequently, there's a subtle manifestations of the Lord's presence that the person misses. If you add this piece, they don't. So all of a sudden, the actual outcome dramatically increases percentage of success, because there's subtle manifestations of the Lord's presence that they would have otherwise missed.
Yes.
Now they say, oh, and there's subtle interactions with the Lord that they otherwise would miss. And now, oh. So positive memory, appreciation. If you have a God memory, that worked extra good. And then notice subtle stuff and describe it out loud. Just those 4 pieces of brain science. We put those together, and it's like all of a sudden the results, it's just like, wow. Yes. We were both just like amazed.
Yeah, and one thing you're saying, Karl, that I don't know if this would be a fifth, but for me, this was revolutionary with Emmanuel Healing, was the interactive connection starts first instead of after you're in the mess.
Oh,
So that to me
oh,
was a game changer. Yeah,
oh, absolutely. That was one of those. The idea of, well, wait a minute, but why not do this at the beginning of the session? I remember that conversation
right.
with Jim, and I was like, was that even
Yeah,
allowed? I mean,
yeah,
is that
right.
and
Yeah.
to have the gentle start, and
Yeah,
also their brain actually is more easy to connect with positive memories and appreciation if they're not in the trauma already,
yeah,
and to establish a connection with Jesus before they get into the weeds.
yeah,
And also, you have that in place as a safety net. So you just spent the beginning of the session, positive
yeah,
memory, appreciation, connection with Jesus. So if you get in trouble, you scurry back to your safety base. So that means a lay volunteer can go into deep water because they have a safety net.
yeah,
If that 23-year-old volunteer in Uganda with a third grade education, in their area of, I wasn't there, but the team I trained, like every single person in those villages had seen at least one member of their family or one friend like chopped up in their front yard with
oh,
machetes. This is, and that's before or after they get raped if they're women. This is
right.
insane.
Yeah,
And so that's, I mean, PhD psychologists in first world countries, would be anxious
yeah,
about even going in there.
yeah,
And these 23-year-old volunteers with third grade educations, okay, well, start with connection with Jesus, make sure that's good and strong. If they don't have that, then you don't go into the weeds.
yeah,
That's another safety net. You don't go into the hard place if you don't have this safety net in place. And you go into horrible stuff. The first thing you do is say, okay, let's invite Jesus there. Can you perceive Jesus? Focus on Jesus, ask him for help, tell me what happens.
mm,
That's the whole process. And if anything happens you don't know what to do with, just scurry back to the safety base, help coach the person to go back to their positive memory and reconnect with Jesus.
yeah,
And maybe you didn't get healed, but at least you end up back in a safe place in a positive memory with Jesus.
yeah,
And that's the basic process. And we could teach that to these people in a weekend. And they go out to these villages with insane trauma, and it mostly worked. Mind boggling.
yeah,
The line I use is, I can teach people to do the basics in a weekend, and you can spend the rest of your life learning the intermediate advanced material. So there's God seems to have special grace for third world countries, for desperate need, for horrible
mm,
trauma. Even there's stuff that's harder, but just the results we see, in the more desperate it is and the less resources they have, it seems like the more grace God gives.
mm,
So that's nice. In first world countries, what we often see is 60 the Urbana thing, the intervarsity thing this past, because it was the beginning of January. Is that right? No, end of December. That's right. Actually, it was the last week of December. So we did like 1,200 sessions. We had a team of 150 people. We did 1,200 sessions over the course of 4 days. A bunch of them were staff, but maybe, might have been 800, close to 1,000 students. And so I got lots of numbers. I spent piles of time afterwards following up, trying to, talk to all the people who were praying and the consultant troubleshooters, whatever, to try to. This was a fantastic research opportunity to get more.
yeah,
The more clearly we understand things, the more effectively we can steward them.
yeah,
And so one of the things I was watching is how many people most of the InterVarsity, half the team was InterVarsity staff that
mm,
barely had basic training, and a handful of practice sessions.
mm,
So I was very curious, how many of these folks, when we see 1,000 people, 1,200 people, how many of them can go through the process with no troubleshooting at all? So a total beginner with almost no training could facilitate a session with no troubleshooting, just positive
mm,
memory, invite Jesus. Oh, there he is. Okay, what do you want to do, Jesus? Just follow Jesus.
mm,
And what we found was 60 to 80% of the sessions, like no trouble. Maybe the simplest troubleshooting, that even the basic beginner, the 1 weekend basic seminar.
mhm,
So 2/3 basic process, no troubleshooting. It just worked like right out of the box, no assembly required.
yeah,
Which is, that's amazing.
yes,
If you had a cancer treatment,
yeah,
and one hand people, oh well, wow, but a third of the people, it's not going to work. That's true. That's a big deal. But
yeah,
if you had a cancer treatment, it doesn't cost much. It's almost painless, and it works for 2/3 of the people.
yeah, sold. Yeah.
You'd have a Nobel Prize tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's huge good news.
Yeah.
But a real piece of reality was, a third of the people needed some amount of troubleshooting, and most of the beginner intermediate facilitators could do it. And then about 1 out of 10 about 10 to 15%, we had a team of expert troubleshooters that anybody who needed more help could raise their hand and they kind of get expert troubleshooting. So, 10 to 15 out of 100, more advanced, intermediate advanced troubleshooting, 20% needed basic troubleshooting, 60 just no assembly required, walked right through it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's if you're like in a practice or even in a church or somewhere, and a third of the people need more help, that's a lot of people. If a third of the people it's not working and they're confused and stuck and still in pain, you do that for 2 weeks as a therapist, and a third of your clients are still in a lot of pain and they get stuck in the middle. So that's why I spend 2/3 of my life or half of it or whatever working on intermediate advanced material.
Yeah.
So I can teach you the basics in a weekend. That's fantastic. And it's fantastic that even beginners can get you back to the safety base if they, and then there's a whole course of work on for folks who have blockages and they have things hindering them. They have stuff hindering them from perceiving Jesus.
Yes.
There's a whole body of knowledge and teaching. So how do you find those blockages and move them? I can hear this is actually another huge piece of good news for the Emmanuel Approach.
Mm-hmm.
I did 40 years as a Christian without ever perceiving God's tangible presence in any way whatsoever.
Wow.
Or 38, it's that was dry. Honestly, Charlotte and I we look at each other and think, how did I even? That's a subtle, invisible miracle that I didn't just quit.
No kidding.
Because that was like eating dust for almost 40 years. It was. It was like just
watching people eat the buffet though along next to you.
Oh, I did.
Right.
I had people all around me who were having, laughing and in the presence of God and healing miraculous. I was facilitating. My patients in front of me were sobbing and talking to the presence of Jesus.
Yeah.
And I had still never experienced that in my life.
Yeah.
So I know what that feels like. Did that for a long time. It's possible, but that's wow, you're missing a lot of the gospel. Oh my goodness. Holy buckets.
Yeah.
Wow. Wowzers.
Yeah.
And I had spent 25 of those years, as a teenager, charismatic renewal. I don't know if some people think that's heretical. Some people think it's wonderful, good news. But the idea that miracles still happen, that people can experience God's living presence, that came to our church when I was a teenager. So for 25 years, I watched people have tangible experiences of God's presence. And I got prayer. I'm thousands of times. Thousands, not 5. I went to so many conferences. I stood in so many lines. I go to a conference for a whole week. I'd stand in the prayer line and they'd come by and I'd open my eyes and everybody else, everybody, there's 300 people on the ground around me lying there smiling, crying, experiencing the Lord, wonderful presence. And there's one person in that part of the building standing with me. Okay. So I go to the next line, get to the end of the next line. And I'd have all 15 teams pray for me. Every morning, afternoon, and evening. I do this 2-3 hours. Have 15 teams pray for me 3 times a day for a week. Just in 1 week, I get prayer 150 times.
Wow.
I did that for 25 years.
Wow.
So I kind of had somewhat of the belief of sometimes there's stuff in the way and there's nothing you can do. It's like God chooses. I don't know. Some people can experience God's presence and some people can't. And so for me, a huge part of the good news with the Emmanuel Approach is if somebody can't perceive Jesus' tangible, interactive, personal friendship presence, there's just something in the way. And that's why a whole bunch of the big Lion book is troubleshooting. The number one, the number one part of the whole Emmanuel Approach troubleshooting toolbox is how do you find and remove blockages that are in the way between the person and Jesus? And there's a few other tools, but 90% of all the troubleshooting in the Emmanuel Approach, it's all about why can't you perceive Jesus yet?
Yes.
What's in the way? Let's find it and move it. Because once you can perceive Jesus and he gets in the driver's seat, you don't hardly need any other troubleshooting. It's like, is Jesus in the driver's seat? Ask him for guidance and help. Tell me what happens. It's like, he's in the driver's seat. I'm just the assistant. Why are you even talking to me? The general's in the room. Why are you talking to the lieutenant? And so all of our troubleshooting is focused on how to help a person have that connection if they can't. The 20 to 40% that it doesn't work right out of the box, they need some kind of troubleshooting help to be able to connect with Jesus. And the 10 to 15% that need more advanced, That's an important part of reality. If you have this ministry in your church, if this is something you're going to do at all,
Yep.
you want to know about that and be able to have a part of your plan be, what about the more advanced troubleshooting for the folks that need more help?
Yep.
But the fact that close to 100%. I mean, there's a couple things like persistent. You're choosing self-pity, or you're choosing. There's a couple things you can do to choose away from the Lord.
Yeah.
And there's a handful of people, out of the thousands of people I've done this with, there's a couple, I mean, less than the fingers on one hand, that I haven't figured out. There's some kind of blockage in there. I can see clues. It's just haven't been able to figure it out yet.
Yeah.
But 99+%.
That's amazing. Yeah. Can you identify kind of some of the key blockages that you run into, and then how do you deal with them?
Yes. So here's the long answer. I'll just tag it in case I forget. So that's one of the most important things that the Immanuel Approach does. I mean, it sets up the basic stuff, which often work wonderful. But then the next thing is, okay, for the folks who can't get it right away, what's in the way? How do we find it and move it? So like half of the Big Lion book talks about tools to do this. There's beginning troubleshooting, intermediate troubleshooting, advanced troubleshooting. And our live, we have a whole library of live sessions. And a bunch of those are like not reenacted, not talking. It was like live on camera. We filmed the session when we were doing it for real. And you can see the troubleshooting like right there. You can see the blockage. We figured it out. Oh my gosh. And we have teaching sessions of people who've never been able to perceive Jesus like they've had my experience.
Yeah.
But we have it on film the first time it worked. And so folks who've tried to connect with Jesus for their whole Christian life, and they've never been able to do it. And we figure out the blockage and we move it. And the guy says, oh my gosh, there's Jesus.
Wow.
He's standing in front of me.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. Just for our listeners to understand, the Big Lion book that Karl's referring to is a book called The Immanuel Approach, and the cover of it has a big lion on it.
Yes, so thank you.
Because if people are like, what's the lion? Where's the lion?
Yes, thank you for helping me to translate for folks who don't know
all the resources, listeners, we'll have all of them in the show notes, so don't worry. Well, all these links and stuff we'll mention at the end, but it'll be in the show notes.
He mentioned the Casey Layman website. The Emmanuel Approach website is the one I've actually maintained most now. And there's a getting started page.
Yes.
I spent the whole last year putting together. I had a business consultant who said, Dr. Karl, your Big Lion book is fantastic.
Yeah.
95% of what anybody ever wants to know about the Emmanuel Approach is in there. But most people are not going to start with an 800-page book. And even your 15-page single-spaced 8.5 by 11 essay about the Emmanuel Approach is a wonderful introduction. But I was all excited about it. I shared it with a bunch of my friends. And they just haven't had time to read it. You got to get an easier on ramp. So I spent the whole last year. So now the getting started page has an entire buffet of there's 15 options for getting started, like a pamphlet that's just front and back, 2 pages. There's a 12-minute video where you can just sit if you're eating lunch and you can just listen to it. You don't have to for the young folks who don't like reading and they want to watch a video. There's a 12-minute video. There's a 20-minute video. There's little live session clips. There's trailer versions of real live ministry where you see somebody get healed right in front of you for just a glimpse for 5 minutes. There's 2-page essays, 5-page essays, 15-page essays. There's a 50-page essay. So the Getting Started page is a buffet of resources for learning more.
And just listeners, so you know, that's EmmanuelApproach.com. IMMANUEL approach.com, all one word. You just click there's a bar at the top, click Getting Started. That's right where you can go for what Karl's talking about.
Also, this is crazy. If you put Immanuel Approach or just my name, especially with an MD on Google, like the first 20 hits will take you to our website, Immanuel Approach stuff, which is
that's awesome.
How crazy is that?
Yeah.
So back to blockages. One of the most common blockages is fear.
Yeah.
Person's like, okay, so I can't perceive Jesus. Okay, Lord, and this is fascinating when you try it. So I'm in my positive memory. I invite Jesus. Okay, I'm not perceiving him. You just ask, so Lord, what's in the way? And often just a thought. Okay, the thought comes like I'm afraid. Okay, more about that. They can hear Jesus even if they can't see him. Like they're afraid to let him be more tangibly present, but they can still hear his voice. How generous, how gracious, how merciful is that? Commonly. Okay, so then that feels true. I'm afraid. Okay, just a little bit more, Jesus. What's up? Oh my, I'm afraid. Yeah, if Jesus shows up, he knows it. Like wow, the stuff I haven't told you yet. I'm like, Jesus knows all the bad things I've done. I'm afraid if I let Jesus show up, he's going to be angry at me. He's going to be disgusted with me. Like, I have fear and shame about the things in my life that I don't want anybody to look at, let alone the perfect Son of God. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. Well, beautiful. Yeah. So if you're afraid to let him show up, that might get in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Duh.
And this is wild. There's more complicated things that sometimes happen, but 2/3 of the time, 3/4 of the time, just focusing that fear and saying, okay, I can't even perceive you yet. I can't feel your presence in any way. But Lord, it's clear to me. I am afraid to let you show up. I'm afraid you're going to be angry. I'm afraid you're going to be disgusted with me. I feel shame and fear. I'm afraid to let you be more tangibly present. So I'm just naming that, Jesus, and I can't perceive you, but just in faith, I'm naming that. Could you please help me? 2/3 of the people in 2 minutes will say, I can just feel that fear. It's 30. It's 3/4 down.
Wow.
Yeah, I feel a little bit, but I feel like it's that went down enough that I'm willing to try it. Okay, so let's just let him. Lord, would you be?
Yes.
I'm willing to let you be here. I'm kind of scared, but I'm willing to let you. Oh my gosh, there he is, and I can see on his face nothing but compassion. And now the fear's all the way gone.
Wow.
It's like, oh man.
And isn't it so simple, Karl, that it's just this moment of, again, that this is the brilliance of when I explain to people, okay, today we're going to sit down and pray, and I'm doing Emmanuel, and I say, here's the win. Like, here's what our win is. You and Jesus connect. If that happens, that's it. We've won. Success, because we can't ask for, once like you said, your language was once he's in the driver's seat, you can't go wrong. And so once that's the case, the healing Son of God is in the driver, like, you're good to go. If he wants to, and this is the beautiful part that I've seen. So maybe I want to keep you going with the blockage thing, but I've seen Jesus at times coast is maybe a word I can say. He doesn't hammer on the gas pedal.
Yep.
And I'm sitting back going, well, I sure would have hammered on the gas pedal. Why are we not going faster?
Yep.
And it's because he's Jesus and I'm not. I can't see everything, and he's like, we need a little bit more of this before we go do that. And I can't figure that out.
And how many times a week later, a month later, how many times 2 or 3 months later, you realize, oh, at least that's happened to me a bunch of times.
Right.
Where I was like, why is he going so slow? Why isn't he going to the trauma? I can see the trauma. We can all see the clues of the trauma. We know exactly where we need to go. Why aren't you going there, Jesus?
Yes.
And then he does other stuff for a month or two or whatever, and then it comes together. And I'm like, oh, there are 3 other places that were still need to be in place. The person didn't have enough capacity. There were related trauma that were bigger that I didn't know about. It's like, oh my, you knew way more than I did.
Yes.
You made all the right moves clinically. That was brilliant clinical decision making, Jesus.
It was.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad you were in the driver's seat, because I'm a competent clinician, but this is the kind of stuff that turns mental health professionals' hair gray, as far as how soon do you go in? How hard do you push? Are we ready? Do they have enough capacity? Are you going to force them into decompensation? Are they going to go home and relapse on their addiction? Are they going to go home and make a suicide attempt? Are we going to have to go from my office to the hospital because I pushed too hard, too fast, and they weren't ready, and I underestimated their internal resources? Now, to have Jesus in the driver's seat, knowing more than you do, making all those judgment calls, which is why lay people can facilitate for this. I mean, if they have a good connection with Jesus and he's in the driver's seat, the lay person doesn't have to have all that clinical wisdom and discernment. I mean, that's the hardest part of being a mental health professional.
It's true.
And if Jesus is doing that part, that's why we can have lay volunteers who can facilitate this, because not only do they have a safety net they set up at the beginning, they can go back to if they need to.
Yeah.
And in the middle, Jesus is in the driver's seat. He's making all the tough clinical decisions.
It's brilliant. Yeah. He's the best psychologist that's ever lived.
Yeah.
That ever was. Yeah.
The new, I'm doing a presentation, a workshop for AAC, American Association of Christian Counselors. They have an annual meeting. They have like 7,000 people there.
Wow.
And I'm doing a workshop on the Immanuel Approach. It's actually the first time I've ever went, but the medical director of this outfit is now a friend of mine. He was like, Dr. Karl, please, can you please come and do a workshop on the Emmanuel Approach? Which he thinks there could be 400 people there. And
awesome. In
preparation for that, I've been working on this presentation for a while. It's turning out to be a little book, which is going to be an introduction to the Emmanuel Approach for mental health professionals.
Wonderful.
Good.
And half the book is case studies of all kinds of examples of, here's Jesus healing attachment trauma. Here's Jesus healing absence wound. Here's Jesus, just his presence healing trauma. Here's him healing grief. Here's him dealing with bitterness. Here's him dealing with truth-based guilt. Here's what it looks like when Jesus does, and just 25 examples, 50 pages of true stories from my personal experience of this is what it looks like when Jesus is the primary therapist. And your job as the mental health professional is you help the person connect with Jesus and then coach them to interact with Jesus as the primary therapist. This is what it looks like.
Beautiful. Carl, can we go back to some more blockages? You said fear, and any others that come to mind?
Fear, and there's 10 versions of that. I'm afraid he's going to be angry with me. I'm afraid I'm afraid he'll be disgusted with. I have shame. I'll feel too much shame. I'm afraid that if I let Jesus manifest and be present, he's going to take me to memories that I've been running away from my whole life. I mean, that's why that stuff's been in the basement for a reason, and consciously or unconsciously they realize this Emmanuel thing seems to break a lot of rules. And I've been to other therapy and I've been in control and I've chosen to, we've never gone to the really bad stuff. And if I let the living presence of Jesus get in the middle of this, I'm not sure what'll happen. I think we should let's just stop him at the front door. Don't even let the camel get his toe in the tent. I think we're going to be safer off, which you think about makes complete sense.
Yeah. Right.
You see that one a lot. Right. Another one, and there's 5 other fears if you think about it. There's anything you can think of that could make you afraid to let Jesus be present.
Sure.
People can figure that out. Well, actually, also, is your community like the whole idea of negative spiritual forces? I mean, like there's a bad side.
Spiritual warfare.
Demonic. That's not freaking people right out. So if there is a whole realm of spirituality is negative, are enemies to God. If I were in charge of that team, like preventing people from connecting with the living, tangible presence of Jesus, that would be a no-brainer. I mean,
high on the list.
That would be way, way up on the list. I mean, it'd be hard to think of what would be in front of it. I mean, if I were another team, it's like if we lose this one, I mean, if somebody and maybe once or twice, and you can somehow scare them away from it. But if somebody actually realizes this is routine, I can do this whenever I want to. This is predictable. We have tools that just like if they make a lifestyle out of this, if they actually get into the habit of doing this regularly, and they have a community that does that, we're done. The war is over. Like I don't care what you have to do, but if you have to jump in front of the guns and stop the bullets with your bodies, seriously, if I were the charge of the demons, I'd be like,
right.
Which occasionally we even see. We have prayers about, hey, you may not interfere with us. If you do, you defy the authority of Jesus. And we have demonic stuff that just like, I'm like, wait a minute, we told him not to do that. And it's like, okay, Jesus, take care of it. And my perception is like they will block the bullets with their bodies. I mean, if it really
they're so desperate.
They're so desperate to prevent people from connecting with the living presence of Jesus.
Yeah, I'm thinking of screw tape letters.
Exactly. Screw tape letters. If you were the supervisor, you'd be like, okay, there's lots of other stuff. There's lots of other details. I mean, try to get them into sin, and of course, if you can break up marriages, and that's all good.
Yeah.
But if they get into if you have a community where it's routine to use predictable tools to connect with the living presence of Jesus, it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
It'd be like one of those action movies. The bad guys have a nuclear weapon.
Right.
Yeah.
And they buried it under the White House. Okay, so if they said this is going to be bad, I mean, this is a really bad deal.
Right.
And you do anything to stop this. Yeah. If the bad guys succeed in setting off the nuclear weapon under the White House, and they convince you that Russia did it, well, World War III and the terrorists destroy the entire planet.
Yeah.
Like that would be the way I would feel about if you get a community where they have a culture where it's normal and routine to help each other connect with the living presence of Jesus.
Game over.
This is game over. Game over.
So how do you see that manifest? Like, what do you see do you see that, and how do you address that?
Well, so where it started was fears. I mean, any fear you could possibly think of that would make you hesitant to connect with Jesus. If I were a demon, I'm going to help people have that thought. And we're not going to leave that to chance. So that's why there's a whole section in the book about all the kind of fears people can have about why not to let Jesus come, what they look like, how to spot them, and how to move them. Whole section of the book. And if we had plenty of time, I'd spend more time on the details, but it's all in the book. And I guarantee you we'll run out of time, and there'll be 10 more things that we won't be able to get to.
Absolutely.
So the enemy helps people think of those fears. There's a whole menu of them, and there's a part of the book that talks about here's the 5 most common fears that people have. Here's how to spot them. Here's how to move them. And it's so cool. Like the people who have, like me, who've tried to connect with Jesus they've spent years, decades as a Christian, never perceived God's living presence. There's a blockage in the way. You find it and move it, and they do for the first time. That's holy ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another one is anger, where how many kids you've seen where they're having a tantrum and they're like I'm going to punish you, like I'm so angry at you, I'm going to punish you by not talking to you and not letting you, like I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to see you, like go away, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Lots of people do that with Jesus. And the real simple summary of how to take care of that, once you spot it, you say, okay, here's what I think I'm seeing. And now that when we're kind of looking at it, like why did Jesus allow this fill in the blank horrible thing to happen? Why did he allow your grandfather to molest you every Sunday morning before he took you to church? Why did he allow your parents to die in a car wreck in front of you? Why did he allow fill in the blank of the horrible thing?
Yeah.
And of course you're pissed at Jesus. I would be too.
Yeah.
So would you be, so at present your approach has been punish Jesus by not, like, I'm so angry at you, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Understandable. We all do that. I mean, most of us do that in one way or another to our friends or our parents or God or whatever. But okay, would you be willing to try an alternate plan? I want to help you get in the ring with Jesus. And here's the deal. If Jesus agrees, you get to talk, and he will listen to all the reasons why you're so angry. And nothing's off limits. Like, as long as you don't throw my furniture, you can swear. He seems to be. He has known sailors and prisoners. He understands. He's worked in VA hospitals. He knows what swear words are. I mean, nothing will shock him or surprise him. You get to say whatever you need to say to Jesus about why you're so blankety blank anguish, and why blankety blank didn't you stop this, and what kind of blankety blank piece of crap are you for letting it happen, whatever. And he will not penalize you. There will be no retaliation. He'll listen to everything you have to say. And he won't respond unless you tell him that you're ready to hear him respond.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to try that?
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Every single person who's been willing to try that, however long their life, the anger piece, every single one who's been willing to try that, it works.
Yeah.
And someone will say, "Oh, I've done that. I've done that before." And say, "Okay, how'd that look?" Well, I feel like I hate you guys. Yeah. So just spewing swear words into the darkness.
Yes.
You just practice being angry.
Mm.
And I've worked with people who've done that, and they've had therapists help them do that for 20 years.
Yes.
It's okay. Now, key difference is you're going to let Jesus show up first, and you're going to talk to Jesus, and you're going to watch his response. That's the one. I mean, that one piece, total game changer. And I'll do that, and they'll be so that. I mean, I have people do this in my office. When they do this for 1 minute, screaming at the top of your lungs, swear words like "I hate you, God blankety blank," whatever. That's pretty intense. Feels like a long time. I've had people do that for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. I mean, 30 minutes nonstop, screaming at the top of their voice. Like, I honest to goodness, I'm thinking, what am I going to say to the policeman who is a neighbor? I mean, like, neighbors can hear.
Right.
I'm not joking. I mean, like,
I've been there.
I mean, screaming every swear word you can think of, at Jesus. And my own piece, I stop every once in a while. Okay, so is Jesus still there? Yes. Are you looking at him? As long as you're looking at Jesus, he's still there. You're looking at him. You're talking to him, and you're watching him response. I'm fine.
Keep going. Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
And every single person who's done that, they get done. It's okay. And whether it's 2 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, one person, I kid you not, 30 minutes, and I'm on the clock. Not your language. So, like, if you're doing delivery and like a blood, like when someone's bleeding a lot, at the end of a delivery, when the uterus contracts, like they can bleed a unit of blood like in 5 seconds, and that 5 seconds feels like 3 years.
Yeah.
And so there's an expression on the clock, which means, because there's things in medicine where they say, I want you to hold that artery 5 minutes on the clock, not like, oh, it feels like a long time. No, it's like on the clock, 30 minutes.
Wow.
Screaming,
which feels like 3 hours. Yeah.
It feels like 3 days. And, and I'm seriously thinking, officer, I'm a psychiatrist. Yeah, we need to come. We need to, I'm working on trauma. This is like, excuse me, sir, but we're gonna need to make sure everybody's okay in here.
Yes. Yeah.
30 minutes on the clock.
Yeah.
Okay. Finally call me. Okay, he's still there. Yep. What's he doing? He's looking right at me. He's listening to me. Okay, why don't you so you're ready to ask him, so what do you want me to know, Jesus? Okay, what do you want me to know? He says there's more. I'm like, are you kidding
Wow.
me, Jesus? Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. That's so
Yeah.
good.
30 more minutes. 30
Yeah.
more minutes. I kid you not. I
Wow.
watched the minute hand go around my clock, my watch 30 more
Oh.
times of screaming, get done, quiet again. Jesus still there. Yep. What's he doing? He's just looking right at me. Okay. You ready to ask? She said, I said, well, how does it feel? I feel like he has heard me.
Wow.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
And the whole thing started moving forward.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
That is beautiful.
It's
I have a,
crazy.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have a couple of
Yeah.
questions that I've had on my mind. I just want to ask a couple of things. One is, we have a large audience that has kind of the center of our worship being the Eucharist, Holy Communion, and that moment of encounter.
Right.
We're encountering
You
the
guys are
Word, but
Catholic,
then
or a bunch of your people are Catholic, right?
then encountering Jesus in the Eucharist. So what would you recommend in that moment, which we experience as the more intense kind of encounter,
Yes.
Pinnacle in a sense. Yeah.
Yes.
to really allow that experience to be
Mm.
not just a time of worship, but a time of healing?
Yes. Well, so this is fun. How did this question not come up before? My bet is that somewhere in the world, out of the thousands of Catholics that are using this, some of the people have thought of some of these things. But so one would be, would there be any reason you couldn't have communion and to have a kind of manual deliberately before you receive the elements? Actually, spend 10 minutes deliberately in a positive memory. Remember, close your eyes, picture yourself in a positive memory. Actually, feel gratitude. Look at think about the details.
Mm.
Invite the living, tangible presence of Jesus. Can you help me to perceive your living, tangible presence, Jesus? And then receive the elements as you're actually aware of the living, tangible presence of Jesus. And just ask him, say, hey, Jesus, I would love to be able to perceive your tangible presence as I actually celebrate communion. And remember, when you do this, remember me. Like, any reason that
the time 10 minutes might be hard in an actual in mass, but
yes.
not impossible at all, because if you sit 20 rows back, you're guaranteed a couple minutes. At least there's a minimum, and you can prepare before. So
and if you have
practically
practice,
speaking,
it takes 10 minutes is for beginners, and it's really
Yes.
rich.
Yeah.
If you're in a retreat or something, or if you have a small group where you're doing communion with each other,
Yes.
you could take the time you need. But yeah, you can do that in a minute or two. People who've
Yep.
done a lot of Emmanuel can easily get their positive memory and connect with Jesus in a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Yep. That's easy.
And so just normal mass, you could do that. And I'd tell me what happens when you share this with your people. Please tell me what happens, because that's
Okay.
got to turn out. It seems like that should turn out well.
I've heard other people in healing ministries, like a Randy Clark, talk about the communion time, even for non-Catholics, being the most powerful healing that they experience.
Right, I forgot healing. I was just thinking connection with Jesus, right? And you could, for healing, you could specifically say, okay, so you have the tangible presence of Jesus, and then you're receiving the elements, and then say, so intercession, right? The whole intercession idea.
Right.
I was doing a training group with mental health professionals, and they did cool healing work, went to trauma. It was all very nice. And at the end, we were just kind of closing up, and the person said, "Oh, and by the way, I have a nephew who's, can we as a group, can we pray for my nephew?" I said, "Well, wait a minute, can you still perceive the presence of Jesus right there?" She goes, "Oh yeah." So, well, why don't you just ask him and why don't you just talk directly to Jesus, whatever your intercessor, whatever your prayer request was, she's like, "Oh yeah, Jesus, I have my nephew, and emotionally, I want to lift him for healing, and I want to ask for you to be more present in his life." Whatever. And she got done with that. We were all just, our mouths were just hanging. We were all just like,
wow.
Yeah.
And she looks at me and she said, "Why would I ever do that any other way after doing that today?" And when you're in traffic, you can't, if you're on the way to the grocery store, "Oh yeah, my friend." So there are reasons for time and energy for faster methods. But the idea of intercession, like establish a connection with Jesus, perceive his tangible presence, and then just talk to him directly about anything you're going to intercede for. So same idea.
Yeah.
In communion, and then ask Jesus for healing.
So would you recommend, Karl, that it would be something to where because the Emmanuel approach, which is unique, is, this is, I guess, the question: are we letting Jesus bring something up, or are we going, I know this memory? Do you have a...
So Not usually I'm doing this, with the therapist, and what I always do humbly, routinely, a person will come in and I say, hey, what do do you have any thoughts about what you want to do today? And they usually have some ideas. I mean, occasionally they come in, they don't know, and I say, if you're feeling brave, you can just give them the blank check. Say we do the positive memory, we do the opening prayer, the positive memory, connect with Jesus, and you say, okay, Lord, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
If you're feeling brave, you can do that. And I think it's been pretty close to 100% something good happens. I don't know if there's ever been one that didn't.
Yeah.
Pretty close to 100%. Often, though, folks come in, they said, hey, I feel like the Lord's been bringing stuff up in my dreams this week. I've been noticing certain triggers. I mean, they come in they've had observations that make them think. I think I've seen a bunch of clues that tell me, that I think there's a trauma over here, that this is a particular trigger, or this is a particular issue with my husband, whatever. They have something they want to work on. So I'll say, here's my thought. This is the opening prayer, and we'll connect with Jesus. And then when you're in your positive memory and you sense Jesus' presence, we can kind of say, here's my thought, Jesus. I mean, I'm thinking that this particular issue with my husband I'd like to work on, or as I've been focusing on that issue, these memories with my older brother keep coming up. So I'm thinking that there's here's what I'm thinking we might work on, Jesus. If I'm on the right track, if I've been hearing your Holy Spirit preparing my heart all week correctly, and we're on target, show us the next step forward. And if you have a better plan, we'll happily follow you. So that's my usual beginning.
Nice.
Here's my thoughts. Humbly offer that. If we're hearing you already in preparation, what's the next step forward? And if we've missed the boat, what do you want to do? And I say that to people. Here what I like to propose. Most folks say, yeah, that's good. And anybody I work with regularly knows the whole drill. And that's the way we start every session. That
awesome.
Makes sense?
That's awesome. Yeah, totally.
So then do it in the middle of communion. So I usually do this in the middle of a session. We have that culture established. We've already had that conversation. So that's all kind of in place. My thought would be a similar idea where if someone's going to try this in Mass, receiving the Eucharist, the same thought, hey, here's my thought, Jesus. You do your prayer, your positive memory, you invite Jesus, you kind of sense his presence. Here's my thought, Jesus. I've been thinking here's an issue that's been on my heart for which I would like healing. And I would like to be able to ask for that, as I receive the Eucharist, perceiving your presence. I would like, that seems like a good place to ask for your healing, Lord. So that's my thought. Yeah. And Jesus is very gentle. I mean, that's one of the things people say, he's spontaneously like, I never realized he would be so kind. I mean, he's like a actual reasonable human being who's gentle. I mean, it doesn't seem, people just it doesn't occur to them that he's actually a wonderful, kind, wise, gentle person. Picture your best friend or your favorite uncle, whatever, and then better. And you say that, it's oh, of course. But the unconscious perceptions of what people expect from Jesus is the mean, angry nun who was always whacking you, and you could never be good enough, and everybody's afraid of her. That's Jesus. No.
No.
So some of those thoughts would be all cool. Now, if you're in a small group where whatever your particular, if you have a priest as a part of the group, or if I were in a Emmanuel community that had a priest in the middle of it, I'd say, hey, let's experiment with stuff. Because the way your brain works better in community, what would be cool is to be able to be doing an Emmanuel session while you're having the Eucharist, and you could be describing. So I'm the priest. I'm saying, okay, Bob. So, presenting the elements. So just checking in. Are you perceiving Jesus in your positive memory? Oh yes. Okay. Tell me a little bit about it. Yeah. So he's right here with me. He's got his arm around my shoulder. He's he's saying to me, when you do this, remember me. It's okay, that's cool. Okay. So here you are. Here's the body of Christ, broken for you. Okay, now tell me what's happening. Oh, wow, his tears are running down his face, whatever. Okay, that's cool. So what it was that you wanted to ask for? Okay, well, so Jesus, Bob, we're asking for healing for for your son here. What would be really cool would be to have the priest actually be in the middle of it, so you could be describing out loud as you're doing it, and have that whole front of the brain works better in community. So that's just a crazy idea.
Yeah, that might work after Mass as a processing on a retreat. That would
exactly that kind of thing where you have a priest who's open to the thing, and you're on a retreat. And I would
there's all kinds of applications, Bob, that I think you and I on a different episode, we don't need to bore Karl with them, where we could piece all these together and offer them to our Catholic community. So
yes, and tell me what, and then let me
absolutely
know
we'll keep you in the loop.
We'll let you know.
Oh, and by the way, did you find I have a Catholic theologian who spent a whole bunch of time and wrote a 25-page paper about the Immanuel Approach in Catholic theology?
Father Basil?
Yes, I think that's
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We are very aware of him and are trying to get him on the podcast.
So, but are you aware of the essay he wrote for me that's on our website somewhere? He actually wrote a 25-page. I think it may be.
Yeah, it's on Casey Layman.
Yes, I think it's.
Yes.
I sometimes can't remember where things are. There's so much stuff there but there's somewhere, Father Basil, who was a Catholic theologian, he knows Catholicism better than I did, and he actually wrote something.
Yeah.
So,
I read something from him.
Good,
I don't know if it's the same article.
If you hadn't already found that, I'd say, oh goodness, go there, because if you have people in your community who are wondering, is this kosher, is this heretical, or whatever,
right?
He knows more about Catholic theology than I do, and he seems to think that it was wonderful. So,
yeah,
okay,
yeah. I've one other question. The understanding of the image of Jesus that we have, working through our imagination, working through our imaging capacities. A couple of different pieces of this that come up a lot when we're praying with people. One is this an imagined image, or is this a real image? Is this Jesus' real face, or is this an imagined face of Jesus? And secondly, how do you know when it's the real Jesus versus some other image that comes in?
Yes, two very good questions. Let me touch the second one first, just so I don't forget. So anybody who's thinking very carefully is the question of how you know it's the real Jesus you're talking to. That's a pretty important question, since that's the absolute center, foundation, focal point. That's the foundation of the entire process. So to ask, how do we know we're actually talking to the real Jesus? That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Which is why the Big Line book has 3 chapters. There's a whole basic chapter on that subject. There's an intermediate chapter on that subject. There's an advanced chapter on that subject. It's like 135 pages answering that question. So the 135-page answer is, which is really, and like one short part of the answer is, it's way less of a problem than most people think, which is, I went in, once we kind of put these pieces together and we realized what we were doing, I was thinking, oh, wow, I was expecting way more trouble right at the front end about people having all kinds of counterfeits and stuff.
Interesting.
And I don't, when I get to heaven, one of my questions is going to be, how did that work? I was expecting the enemy to be allowed to cause a whole lot more trouble there. And most people are just sort of amazed. Like, I was expecting way more trouble with counterfeit stuff. So there's some trouble, but it's like, it was a quarter of what I was expecting. So that's just one. Yeah. That was my observation, and many other people have had similars. Like, wow, now that you mentioned that, Dr. Karl, most people just have the real Jesus and everything works wonderfully, and that there's way less trouble there than I thought. So that's one piece. And then that's like the first point in the basic chapter. And then the next 133 pages of the 135 pages is all the different ways you can, there's a whole bunch of things you can look for, that you can learn to look for about the real Jesus. Just is identifiable. And if you spend tens of thousands of hours doing this, you learn to notice there's a bunch of things that help you recognize Jesus.
Yeah.
And tell them apart from demons. Don't do Jesus very, very, very well. That's easier. Internal parts of a person can actually imitate Jesus much more effectively. So there's a whole big section on a whole bunch of questions you can learn to ask. And that's kind of the intermediate zone where, when you're learning this, there's that whole chapter. There's 16 or 17 criteria about here's a whole bunch of different things you can look for that'll help you recognize the real Jesus. And that there's a season of your life where you'll do that. And as you spend more and more time doing this, it's like the federal agents for counterfeit.
They get good. Yeah.
Part of their training is they learn all these things about, the little scrolling and all the different things that you can, like, there's a whole checklist of things. And then another part of their training is they just handle 100,000 bills. And they just, I'm talking hours and hours and hours. They just handle 100,000 $20 bills. They know what they feel like. They know what the pay, and they've just seen it. Their implicit memory, their right hemisphere system has just looked at and felt and handled and moved what they sound like, what it smells like, what it feels like, how heavy they are, what's the fabric. Just all kinds of subtle stuff that you wouldn't even be able to articulate. But when those agents touch a counterfeit bill, what happens is they don't say, oh, I noticed a little teeny little thing next to the one, blah, blah, blah. Like, something's wrong. So the first thing is something feels wrong. And then the left hemisphere goes down their checklist.
Interesting.
And so as a person gets more experience with doing this, and when you experience the living presence of Jesus, for lots of hours, and you just get a feel for, I just know what it feels like when Jesus is doing stuff. And easy things like he doesn't ever do sarcasm. I mean, there's things that pretty quickly you like if somebody supposedly is talking to Jesus, and that presence is not life giving. It's like whoa, 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 whoa,
Yeah.
and you just
Yeah.
and specific things like being sarcastic, like being mean, like being harsh, like it's like
Yeah.
out of 40,000 hours of doing Jesus, he just does not do sarcasm. He does not make mean jokes. He does not. So that's kind of the
Yeah. That's good.
a bunch of quick points,
That's good.
and then of course the 135-page version on how do you know it's the real Jesus. And then the second piece about the imagination, ways I think about that. When you remember something visual, like your visual cortex gets pulled in, like that, like the part of your brain that does visual imagery. When you dream visual, your visual cortex lights up. If you close your eyes right now and say, okay, remember your wedding, remember your, picture your wife's face, picture like something that you have a child. Okay. So, picture your oldest son's face for me or whatever. Your visual cortex is generating that image. And you know where you look at that file and your visual cortex says, oh yeah, here you go, Bob. I mean, here's the images on file we have for the most recent version of your oldest son. And part of the way we know that is if a person has a stroke in their visual cortex, they don't just lose vision like I can't see now. The way that the vision actually supplies that component for your memories, so your memories go blind. And he just says black and white. It's like if you lose your color cortex, retrospectively, your memories all go black and white.
Wow.
Because without that part of your cortex supplying the color vision, that's what like that does color for you, even like not just imagining, but just memory. So your dreams go black and white, your memories go black and white, your imagination goes black and white. So it's like your brain does visual imagery, whether it's memory, whether it's okay, I want you to picture your plans for next week, or whether it's okay, like you're reading The Lord of the Rings, and while you're reading a book, you kind of imagine what might that look like. So that's just some interesting brain science there.
Yeah.
And the piece that I think is most important is the difference between I'm going to proactively, like I want you to close your eyes and picture a pink elephant. You can feel yourself proactively kind of constructing an image of a pink elephant. That's different than if you're sitting there and an image just comes into your mind spontaneously without you like looking for it or constructing it. And what I tell people is, I want you to try please do not proactively construct an image of Jesus.
Yes.
Because the living presence of Jesus is going to come into your awareness, and he's going to actually bring imagery. He's going to initiate the image that's most helpful. And your job is to receive it, as opposed to you're doing guided imagery where you're actually proactively constructing your image. And the way, as far as you talk about imagination, to me, I think it's from the brain science perspective, it'd be actually more helpful to ask, well, I can tell you your visual cortex, the part of your brain that does your memory for what your son looks like, is going to also be in the middle of it. When Jesus generates an image in your mental awareness of how he's present in the memory, in your, here you're being bullied or whatever, he's with you, or even just your positive memory. So that's what I would describe it. And
that's good.
An image that comes spontaneously. And as far as we know, he's got to be using your visual cortex. And it's not so much your imagination, it's just your visual. He uses the same visual system that you use for your memory, for your imagination, for your anticipation, for if you picture a book, if you think about I want to go to, we're going to go back to our campground, the camping site we've been to for the last 10 years with our family in Wisconsin. We're going to go there next week. You can close your eyes and picture, oh yeah, I think I can kind of imagine what kind of things we might do. Which is like, that's kind of using your imagination to picture what we're going to do next week. And that's similar to remembering what we did last year. And you think of remembering what I did last year and picturing it, that's a memory, and that just feels real. Picturing what might it look like next week. And so it's just so easy to get unnecessarily tangled. Oh, it's my imagination. That's bad somehow. It's like, well, your job, what I want you to do is submit your visual cortex. Say, Jesus, can you please use my visual machinery to show me how are you present with me in this memory? And then just be able to receive what comes forward spontaneously. Does that?
Yeah, there's some.
That's good.
Very quickly, Karl, I call that neural priming when I talk to my clients. I just say, let's try to not to get your brain to prime us.
Yes.
And what's interesting too, to overlay that with some St. Ignatius of Loyola and the discernment of spirits, and the second set of rules, if I recall, he talks about a phrase with cause and without cause when he's discerning whether or not God is speaking. And with cause, in my mind, is a neurally primed response versus a without cause is it came out of nowhere.
Yes.
So Bob, we could probably talk about that later, but I'm aware of the time. So
Yeah, I'm aware too.
yeah, Karl, I want to go through just the list of resources to make sure I have things to send people. So first and foremost, the Immanuel Approach has been a large chunk of what we talked about. So the big lion book that's called the Immanuel Approach, and you can find that, I think you can find it on that website, emmanuelapproach.com. I think you can find it on most other places. That I think I bought mine on Amazon.
That's a good one to touch, because the Outsmarting Yourself book and the Immanuel Approach.
Yes.
The store page of my website, the Emmanuel
Yes.
Approach website, will take you to the place. There's a team that does fulfillment for us for the internet.
Gotcha.
Now, we don't go through Amazon because somehow it bugs me to spend 10,000 hours writing a book, and then Amazon does almost nothing, and they want to take most of the money.
Gotcha.
So, especially
Fair.
since I don't need them to market it really, because we have our own community.
Yeah.
If you go on Amazon, there'll be people who will sell you secondhand copies for $100. Seriously, right. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
And sometimes for $500. I found
it's like a rare book, right?
Yeah, just for kicks. You can go on there once in a while, and I've seen my books being sold secondhand for $500, $785, $150. If you go to my website, you can get them for $27 and $30, which is
there you go,
just a whole lot better.
Yeah. So emmanuelapproach.com. And thank you for that reminder, because I remember going, why is he not on Amazon? But that's helpful to know. So emmanuelapproach.com, tons of resources there. You also mentioned Outsmarting Yourself, and that's outsmartingyourself.org. And that's a whole other book and a whole other kind of reflection and theory about neural structures and the logical explainer.
Triggering and emotional memory, and how trauma comes forward invisibly, and all kinds of important phenomena that affect every person in the world every day.
Yeah. And then you've just written a book called Mind and Brain.
That's on Amazon. That's actually on Amazon.
That one's on Amazon. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can get that on Amazon. And so again, Emmanuel Approach is a book, Outsmarting Yourself is a book, and the latest Mind and Brain. Emmanuel Approach is the one we've referenced most today. Right. So again, websites, emmanuelapproach.com, outsmartingyourself.org. And then the one that's like the basically grad school for free is kclayman.com, which is just chocked full of resources. And it's amazing all the way back to your reflections on Theophostic and EMDR, and just
different kinds of therapies,
opening prayers for sessions, and
sample prayers, and
your work on judgments was excellent.
That one changed my life. That judgment piece of stuff.
Yeah.
That changed mine and Charles' lives.
I refer people to that all the time.
Yeah. So one piece about the imagination, is it just my imagination? Is it really Jesus? So some of the clues that tell me, at least some of the time, I think Jesus has got a lot to do with the imagery. I mean, whether it's 100%, how that all works, the brain's pretty complicated. But like the agnostic guy who didn't believe in Jesus, we said, okay, let's just try this. He's like, whoa, Jesus is in my memory. And like, he was not sitting there. I'm going to picture, he was like sitting there, and he goes, like you could see him start physically in my office. So that whatever happened in there surprised him, which is not what you usually see if a person is kind of generating it with their own imagery. But that's actually one of the clues, is like when they're totally surprised, that's a big clue that Jesus has got to do. There's a fair amount of Jesus in the middle of that, because he surprises people, and people don't tend to surprise themselves. Like if you're talking to a hand puppet, you don't usually surprise yourself. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize you were going to do that.
Unless you got a lot of other issues happening.
So if you've got a pretty serious level of dissociation, you can surprise yourself with a hand puppet, but generally not.
Yeah.
And then there's things Jesus does. This is actually the new book that's going to come out in a month, the Introduction to Emmanuel Approach for Mental Health Professionals, that has like 50 pages. There's a bunch of those stories, a bunch of the case studies are things that have never been written anywhere in any of my work before. Some stories I've shared verbally with just people on podcasts, but there's a bunch of those that have never been in writing anywhere. And there's a whole section in there about, it's hard to think of any other word other than impossible or miraculous. As far as some of the sessions, Jesus does things that you're just like, I don't think there's any way a human therapist has ever done that or could do it. I mean, there's a lot of sessions he just does basic tools, and he's like a really good therapist, and he looks like Jesus, and it's brilliant. but you're like, hey, I've done a session like that before in the
Yeah.
So that's cool. I mean, he does that too. But there are some sessions where it's just plain miraculous, just stuff that you're just like, wow, I've never seen that before. The results one easy one is physical healing. We've had a handful of sessions where a person does an Emmanuel session and they're claiming to interact with they say, oh, Jesus is here. They describe what's happening, whatever. And they get done and there's some kind of physical healing. Like, for example, they were blind. And no, they're not anymore. So something that's not just like, oh, I had a headache and it's gone. It's like, okay, well, that's a little bit more dramatic.
Yeah.
And one of the most dramatic ones is one of my buddies who's a physician, retired physician. And he had a lady who he was doing a manual prayer for. And she had a paralyzed leg because she needed a hip replacement. He had a hip degeneration in her hip. Third world country, went to a free clinic, and they gave her a new hip, but they cut a big nerve. And so her hip joint worked, but her leg was paralyzed. And you can tell, I mean, as a doctor, if you cut a nerve, there's a kind of the muscles, just like there's a kind of flaccid total paralysis that's just recognizable. And you can also tell, I mean, like one nerve doesn't just do the whole leg. There's different, I mean, so as a doctor, Dr. Karl could just look at her leg and say, oh yeah, I can tell you which nerve they cut. I mean, he was a surgeon and you could see there's paralyzed muscles and they all go to one big, I mean, like, so it all makes sense. You can just see it. Yep, sure enough, that's what happened. So that was not part of the prayer. I mean, she just came in with crutches. So he asked her, hey, what happened? And she told the story. So then, okay, well, I'm so sorry. Then they did the Emmanuel prayer and they got done with their Emmanuel prayer, which was really beautiful. And she experienced Jesus and she got some good healing. And he looks at her leg and her muscles are moving.
Wow.
And he says, ma'am, I think maybe you got healed there. And she's like, no, my leg. So no, just look at them. They're not flat.
Wow.
I mean, they're normal.
They're active. Yeah.
They're active. And he had to work to convince her to try standing up because he was hoping, no, I can't. My leg's paralyzed. But he could see. I mean, he had a lot of faith because he could see the muscles moving. You know, he knew exactly what the deal was. So that's a data point that would make you think. At least some of the time, I'm pretty sure we have the real Jesus, because suggestion. I mean, people say, well, it could be suggestion, it could be visual imagery. You know, the therapist could be suggestive, the person could be just generating unconscious stuff. All good questions to ask, but I don't think that's going to produce those results.
Amen.
I don't think suggestion, visualization, unconscious, whatever. Like there's a section of the new book that has a bunch of those stories. That's like it's hard to imagine how suggestion can do these.
Yes.
Yeah. That's great.
Dr. Layman, I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you on a large scale because you've done a lot of hard work and Bob and I are in the field as well. And the silent yeses that you make to be able to bless people, it's really a privilege for me to be able to say thank you to your face because a lot of the things that you have done have blessed a lot of other people that I've worked with and ministered to. So I'm very grateful for all of the yeses that you and Charlotte have made because it's blessed my life and blessed a lot of other people's lives. So thank you for following the Lord and saying yes to him and not becoming a neurophysicist or whatever, or a nuclear physicist. You are a neural physicist in some ways. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you.
Jake just woke up all our relational circuits with gratitude.
Yeah,
there we go.
Boy,
thank you.
Talking about the living presence of Jesus for an hour, that always turns my relational circuits on.
Amen.
Even just reading my notes. I mean, seriously, like for this presentation I'm going to do in a month, just reading through the section where I'm going to share a bunch of stories. No matter how bad of a mood I am, I spent a half an hour and I read through 10 stories of Jesus being amazing. I'm like, okay, I feel better.
That's so good.
That's so good.
Yeah. So thank you very much. And listeners, we highly encourage you to check out all the resources that we've mentioned, and I'm sure it'll bless your life like it's blessed Bob and I's. And so listeners, we look forward to talking to you again soon. Again, Dr. Layman, thank you for being with us and God bless you. Bye for now.
Amen.